Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Organically for Wholesale Markets. Today we will talk about crop rotation. For today's episode, we're going to join Richard Moyer in Russell County, Virginia, who we last saw weeding out his onion bed, to learn about his harvest and what he plans to grow there next.
The southern Appalachian ecosystem is one of the most diverse in the world. And so naturally we have great soils, enough rain year-round, mild enough seasons, we can grow a huge variety of things. Last year we had winter squash. This whole area, this whole field here was winter squash last year. And I've noticed by observation, and we all observe, pay attention, when I do a winter squash and then I try to follow the winter squash with my winter cover crop, my rye that I typically use with some kind of legume, the rye looks really puny following winter squash. And when I got to thinking about the thousands of pounds of winter squash I was taking off of that plot, that's a lot of potassium, it's a lot of other nutrients that are leaving that field. And so I realized that I needed to build that soil back up. So we had, or at least apply adequate fertilizer to make sure I get a good next crop. So to fertilize the onions this year following winter squash, I had a lot of organic matter over the fall. I did both a living green mulch, a living cover crop, a winter crop that I was able to mow and plant into here. But then also I fertilized at a high rate. I used an organic fertilizer, a feather meal, and I fertilized at the very highest rate that was recommended for onions because I knew I had a crop that took a lot out of the soil. Another thing that we've done here is we have sodded middles in our rows. What I mean by that is that instead of having the whole thing be bare soil, I take a tractor and I use a chisel plow when I go and I just break up the soil right where we're going to plant the crop. But I leave in between, I leave sod, which here is a lot of actually violets that are coming in here. And this helps hold the soil temperatures down. The soil food web is happy because we haven't disturbed the soil. When we do get rains, and we're praying for rain now, we're dry. More of the rain can soak in if we have a lot of organic matter here and root structure. Channels earthworms are making for infiltration. It's just a healthier ecosystem overall when we disturb the soil as little as possible. So we were here before when we first transplanted the candy onions. That's one of 3 kinds of onions we grew this year, and we started with organic transplants. And we set the candy onions out about 4 inches apart. They have potential to get up to 6 inches. A friend who planted the same onions at the same time, he spaced his farther and he got bigger onions as a result. So when you think about spacing on certain crops, root crops like beets, onions, carrots, when you transplant things like the onions or when you seed them, the rate at which you seed them or whether you thin or not, your final result can be a larger or smaller root crop. Now in certain markets you may want to have a smaller root crop, certain markets larger may sell, so you can keep that in mind. But do pay attention to spacing when you first put them out, or as far as thinning. If you don't have time to thin, you may want to seed at a lower rate, though do pay attention to germination. So you can see here, this one is a keeper, an onion that will keep a long time, and the name of this is Copra, C-O-P-R-A, also organic transplants. And every one of these transplanted at the same time, and you can see the variation of sizes I have. Now if I was selling these as a graded onion, I had to have a certain size. I'd have a lot of things that were probably too small for that. I've come back in the same space and I'm following onions in the same bed. I controlled weeds in this bed, and now I'm following with beans. And so here I have a late planting of beans. This is a bush bean called Crockett. So again, as far as following one crop with another, I'm using beans to build the soil back up because they're fixing nitrogen. I'm not following a root crop with another root crop, again, in terms of rotation. I did a good job of controlling weeds in this planting earlier in the year and last year, so now I can follow with the beans with minimal problem with weed seed bank. So a lot of things going on here. And we have a good chance of getting the crop. Also, in terms of season extension, I'll be able to put a row cover on these bush beans, much harder on a pole bean. Now the germination is quite poor, you can see on these beans. I had some more recent seed on this. I do have seed to replant this. It's been really hot and dry. We've been trying to keep enough water to help this stuff come up. So when you have a new crop that you've seeded come up, sometime you need to come back and water several times. At least pay attention to moisture. I do have pine straw on here. We just watered this yesterday again. And you can see that this pine straw is keeping the soil moist, which does help in germination. When we use a heavier mulch like this, with certain crops like beans, sometimes you need to come and check. Make sure that the mulch itself isn't causing problems with the plant coming up through it. So sometimes what I'll do, come along and I'll just check on the mulch with something big, like, particularly like a bean. I'll move the mulch out of the way and then put it back. Trying to build organic matter with this mulch. Trying to keep the soil moist in these really hot conditions we're having now. We're having a record heat wave. Think about your labor issues. If you plant the same kind of onion in this case, or the same kind of crop, if you have plenty of labor, or you can schedule a crew to come in just at one time, you may want to have all of your crop ripen at once. So I could have put out the same onion with the same days to maturity, candy onion in this case, and then I could have had 5,000 or 10,000, how many of those planted out, all ready to be harvested on the same day if my labor worked out. For us, almost all of our labor is family, me and my 3 younger kids. And so we want to stagger things out because we have a lot of other things going on as well. So we planted 3 different kinds of onions this year with 3 different maturity dates. So we're spacing out our labor as far as when it's time to pull the onions, when it's time to dry them, when it's time to take them out of the field and put them in a barn and finish curing them. So think about in terms of how you're going to harvest the crop, whether you want to have that particular thing, whether it's tomatoes, peppers, onion, carrots, whatever, all ready at once, or whether you want to space it out. What works best for your system? This sounds crass, but you want to follow the money. Identify your markets before you ever plant something. Check with ASD, what do they need? Check with Southern Exposure, what do they need as far as edible production? Check with manager at local farmers markets or wholesalers, aggregators, what do they need? You may have a certain crop you enjoy growing, but if many other people around you enjoy growing the same crop at the same season, the same time, the same buyers, it's tough to break into that.
Well, that's all for today's episode. Hope to see you next time on Growing Organically for Wholesale Markets.